What if, instead of landing in Washington DC or New York City or Nevada, aliens landed somewhere else? What would be the social, cultural and political repercussions on a particular country or neighbourhood when faced with an alien invasion?
The government then established an aid group that started to ferry the aliens to a temporary camp that was set up just beneath the ship.
In 2009, director Neil Blomkamp made a film about aliens landing in Johannesburg during 1980s apartheid South Africa.
The government noticed that they were moving into new areas. That's when things started to get out of hand.
And in 2011, Joe Cornish made a film about aliens landing in a housing estate in South London.
What is that, cuz? That's an alien, bruv. Believe it. And I landed in the wrong place, though. You get the wrong place. Welcome to London, motherfucker.
Both films used aliens as a storytelling device to look at race, class, and otherness in their respective cultures. And they became two of the most innovative and celebrated sci-fi horror movies of the 21st century.
What is that?
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of alien horror, and we discuss Neil Blomkamp's District 9 and Joe Cornish's Attack the Block. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th series exploring the evolution of alien, sci-fi, and cosmic horror, and this is part 25. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at two brilliant alien invasion movies from outside of the United States, District 9 from 2009 and Attack the Block from 2011. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. Both are brilliant films. Give them a watch before listening to our discussion. So, later on in this episode, I will be joined by South London's finest, Lou Thomas, to discuss Attack the Block in detail. But first of all, it's time to talk District 9. I sat down with friend of the pod, broadcaster, journalist, and fiancée, Rhianna Dhillon, to discuss Neil Blomkamp's brilliant film in depth. Enjoy.
Nobody comes back late at night anymore. They have more security.
The government noticed that they were moving into new areas. That's when things started to get out of hand.
They don't belong here.
They're spending so much money to keep them here when they could be spending it on other things. At least they're keeping them separate from us.
A lot of bad things started to happen.
They must just go. I don't know where they go. And they must just go.
We're at the breaking point. People are living in fear.
Welcome back, Rhianna Dhillon. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. How's it going?
Good.
Good. We're sitting here. We'll keep our voices fairly low because we've got bunnies just sleeping next to us.
Yeah, we have been disturbing them a bit. They're a bit cross with us.
They're always getting cross with us. So this series, we're talking about something I know that you are quite keen on for once, because usually I'm here asking you, what do you think of witches and the occult and folk horror? And you're always like trying your best, bless you, to sound positive about it. But I know that you're not actually that keen. Whereas this time, you actually are a fan, right, of a sci-fi horror?
I do. I love sci-fi, generally. I find it fascinating. I love the idea that there is so much potential in a sci-fi.
Yeah.
Because, the universe is so huge and wild and... I interviewed Dr. Brian Cox recently.
Oh,
Clang. And he was just talking about the infinite possibilities of space. And we have no idea what's kind of past our little bit, really. I mean, they can predict and they can guess, but they don't really know. And that's what I mean about the potential of space. And I love films that try and explore that potential and exploit it. I think it's fab.
Yeah, sci-fi is kind of our one genre we have in common, right? Because we have very opposite film tastes most of the time, but we found common ground for our love for Battlestar Galactica, for example. Even our bunnies, right?
Yeah.
They're called Apollo and Starbuck, based on characters in that.
You're not such a Star Trek fan, are you?
I'm not, and I think I probably would have been if I'd grown up watching it. I'm sure it's the sort of thing that would have been absolutely up my street.
Yeah, I think it would have been. I did. I loved it growing up. Captain Kirk was like one of my earliest crushes.
I love it. What, William Shatner? That's brilliant.
Fancied him so much when I was about 6.
The one I really want to watch that everyone says is amazing is Deep Space Nine. Have you ever watched Deep Space Nine?
No, I don't think I have, but everyone does say that's amazing.
I feel like we should watch that at some point. We never have time, but whenever we do have time to watch a good old box set. Yeah, apparently it's really good. But yeah, no, I never got the chance to watch Star Trek, but I do love the world of sci-fi, the ideas of sci-fi. When it's proper sci-fi, and I'm not talking like Star Wars, because that feels to me more like an action-adventure swashbuckler almost, rather than it's not dealing with kind of ideas of space and time and existence and all of that
something
kind of
like
stuff.
Interstellar. I really loved that, just, but it was not a perfect film, but it was experimenting and it was showing us other possibilities, and we'll never forget the idea of being on a planet where time moves differently, and so people age if they're not on that planet and vice versa. That is such a terrifying thought for anyone who wants to do deep space exploration, but also that the huge waves,
and that's why it's so good for horror, because you don't need an alien for it to be terrifying, because like you say, space is so scary.
Space will kill you.
Space will kill you. It's freezing cold, or it might be boiling hot, or you go too close to the sun.
There's no oxygen.
There's no oxygen. You're in a vacuum. There's it's always something like 2 inches of whatever tin that separates you from a vacuum in these shuttles, right? And it's everything about space is terrifying. And you hear these Brian Cox programs where they're explain to you that we could all get sucked into a black hole one day and stuff, and which we will, by the way. Apparently we will. Maybe not for a few million years, but we will.
We will.
So all of that is terrifying, like that kind of cosmic level horror.
Yeah.
That almost makes your brain hurt to think about, I love all of that stuff. But then there's the opposite, which is what we're going to discuss, which brings it very much back down to earth on a human level, right? These kind of nitty-gritty alien films that have a human, social, political kind of subtext to them as well, right? Yeah,
that's exactly it. And it's used for people. It's still used for humans, isn't it?
Yeah.
An illegal alien and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it does feel other, but it also feels something very close. It can be used to mean so many different things.
So true. Let's discuss District 9 then, shall we? From 2009.
Let's do it.
Why are you here? Why don't you just leave? How do your weapons work?
So District 9 begins like we're watching a documentary, doesn't it? And it's kind of explaining the backstory to us that aliens didn't land where you might think. They didn't land in New York City or above the White House or all these other cliches we've seen in movies. Aliens landed in Johannesburg in South Africa, and we get this incredible image of this mothership just hovering over Johannesburg, don't we? And the film plays out sort of, and we'll talk about this, but it sort of plays out like a talking head documentary style, doesn't it? It's revealed that aliens landed sort of over 20 years ago in the mid 80s above Johannesburg, and basically the mothership was filled with these aliens. Again, not necessarily what you'd expect. They weren't these kind of super powerful, dangerous
trying to take over the planet or
coming
anything
out to
like that.
zap us with a ray gun like in Mars Attacks. They were these very ill-looking, malnourished, I think they're described as sort of aimless creatures, right? All huddled in the dark in this ship, not really knowing what to do. And so basically what ends up happening is Johannesburg and the government have to house around 1 million, I think they say, aliens. and they basically stick them all in this one area called District 9, or I think there are various districts, and it's essentially a slum, right? They live.
It's a ghetto.
It's a ghetto, exactly. They live in this ghetto, and then we cut to the present day at the time, 2009, and that is, we're now in this world where humans and aliens coexist, but they very much are, they're not living in harmony, let's say, right? No. These aliens are these very disenfranchised, poorer race of creatures that are living in these ghettos, that are being rounded up, that are being treated horrendously. And we follow this story of this, our main character, our anti-hero, called Vicus, played by Charlton Copley, who is this horrible, snivelling kind of government official, right, whose job it is to go and kind of round up all of these aliens that he calls prawns. There's a kind of derogatory term, prawns, and get their signatures so that they can get rid of them from District 9 and put them in basically concentration camps, right? But then bad shit goes down. He accidentally gets infected and he starts transforming into one of these aliens, which kind of has to sort of change his sympathies and his perspective, doesn't it, essentially?
Yeah.
So obviously the film is very much playing heavily on this idea, on this metaphor of apartheid, isn't it, really? It's I don't think it's any coincidence, is it, that it's in South Africa that this story is being told, right? And this kind of horrible, cruel division between one race and another being played out. What do you think of the film? Are you a fan of it? Did you first see it when it first came out?
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about your history with it.
I did. It blew me away. It really did. Again, for all of the reasons we mentioned, the fact that it was set in South Africa. How many films do we see set in South Africa for a start? Yeah. That aren't documentaries or specifically talking about Nelson Mandela or apartheid itself, etc. So seeing a sci-fi set in South Africa was fascinating. The fact that it was this complete unknown actor at the heart of it, this kind of faux documentary style as well,
we'll discuss,
which we'll get onto. But that all of these little elements made it seem so independent and cool and free from any restraints of that sort of sheen of like a massive studio.
Yes.
And that was all the more appealing, I think, for this kind of film. Just seeing the design of these creatures as well, of the aliens, was incredible, and how much humanity was projected onto them, and how much heartbreak was in the film.
It's a much sad. I've watched it obviously this week with you, and it's a much sadder film than I remember it being. I think because of the treatment of these aliens.
Yes, I think
maybe I've just gotten much softer in my old age.
No, I don't think. I think we've got older, and I think we've seen how humans are treated on a daily basis by other countries.
Well, there's something about, even in the week we're recording this, right, and that news about the migrants drowning in the English Channel, and like, even the imagery at the beginning of District 9 when they said, we opened up the spaceship and all of these aliens seemed malnourished. They described them as aimless, and they're all kind of, in a really bad way. And there's something about that imagery even that reminds you of migrants, coming over to other countries, like, I don't know, hiding in the back of lorries or whatever it might be, or on boats or whatever. And it has that same kind of imagery too, I think. And it's really kind of heartbreaking because that is very, very real, and is still real, literally right now, still happening.
But even it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think especially this week, that word migrant has become so much more loaded, and everyone is saying it's not migrant, it's person, it's people, it's humans. And that's kind of what they do in the film, is they kind of they make sure there's an us and them by using this different terminology of prawns or whatever. And yes, at the heart of it, the reasons are that they are trying to escape from one place to another, but that we are all the same people. That's the whole point of everything that's been in the news this week. Everything that's, I think, about this film is the fact that everyone has the same motivations to want to survive and live.
And then, obviously, again, it's an obvious thing, but aliens have always represented the other. Right? And whether it was in 1950s alien invasion films where they basically were communists, like aliens were Russians, essentially, right? To 1970s kind of conspiracy alien films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers patches where it felt like a very kind of Watergate-esque kind of conspiracy thriller Alien, to I think what we're seeing in this decade with films like Cloverfield and these kind of documentary-like political kind of almost sort of tapping into that idea of found footage a little bit, but also maybe this kind of post 9/11 xenophobia and fear of outsiders coming, invading, attacking our soil and that kind of thing as well.
And also who and I think later on, who are the real monsters?
Yes,
that very much plays into this, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, it really does. I love this film as well. I really love it. I think it's it blew me away, just like you, when I first saw it. I couldn't believe how good it was. And yeah, watching it, I don't think I'd watched it a second time until this week.
No, I don't think I did. But did you not think that the imagery had really stayed in your head so clearly?
Yes, a lot of it I remembered so clearly. Yeah. But yeah, like I was just as impressed with it, and I was a little bit worried that it was not going to be as good on second watch. I was, like this happened with Cloverfield. I rewatched Cloverfield, which blew me away when I first saw it, and then I was talking to Adam and Rob about how it almost feels too much of its time, too much of a kind of post 9/11 found footage film, that it didn't quite have that impact on me a second time round. But this really did, for so many reasons. And I think like we just discussed, that some of those themes and metaphors are still very sort of devastatingly real right now, obviously. And I think, it's very much about apartheid, but also I think it's just sort of about division and hatred and everything else that's global, I suppose, isn't it? It's very good, and there's some great body horror.
There is. Oh god, there's actually way too much body horror in this for me. I'd forgotten.
And this was, like you say, this was the first real starring performance from lead actor Charlton Copley, and it was the debut feature from the director Neil Blomkamp as well. And the other thing about revisiting this and me being worried it wouldn't hold up is because Neil Blomkamp, sadly, has not really done anything very good ever since.
He's sort of not lived up to the potential of District 9.
He hasn't. He did Elysium, which was kind of all right, but a bit dull. Then he made Chappie, which was kind of, again, it had some interesting stuff about it, but it was a bit annoying and ridiculous. And then he made a terrible film, which we saw at Fright Fest this year, called Demonic, which is one of the most...
was that the one that you said was basically unwatchable? It was
basically unwatchable. It really was.
Yeah.
It was it was like it was made by somebody who had never made a film before and didn't understand what films were. And it's like, and how is it that he got it that wrong when District 9, I think the filmmaking itself, the directing, the performances, the cinematography, everything comes together and works so perfectly for the story he's telling. I think,
I agree. And it's such a shame, because he was going to do an Alien sequel, and then I think that's been taken away from him in light of his more recent filming decisions.
He had all these concepts and ideas, didn't he, for an Alien, an actual sequel, and I think it would have even starred Sigourney Weaver. I think she was kind of on board potentially, and then it all got cancelled when Ridley Scott went, I want to make another Alien film, actually, and then we got Prometheus. So we'll never know whether or not. We'll never know whether or not Blomkamp would have done a good job or not, because who knows? Because clearly he's quite an uneven filmmaker, isn't he?
Well, he's only made this one really brilliant film that everyone was kind of in raptures about, and so actually he's in talks to do a sequel to this one. And again, it's it all comes down to politics, and I think, as we said, it's still the politics of it are still so relevant. So it could very much work. But I don't know if we need to see a sort of Trump era film that's kind of set in the world of District 9. Do you know what I mean?
It's sort of done. That story's done, I think, isn't it?
So I'm not sure how... I think what's so brilliant about District 9 is that it is this fantastic standalone film, and that it's a one and done, in my opinion. You don't often get that brilliance, and just leave it there.
The story's been told, kind of thing.
And it leaves it on a very poignant note as well. I don't think we need to return to that.
Let's talk about the actual way this film looks then, because it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it starts very much like you're watching a mockumentary.
It could be like The Office.
It could be like The Office. It could be like in the horror genre, movies like Lake Mungo. These were things that were very popular at this point in time. These kind of fake documentaries.
Love Lake Mungo.
Love Lake Mungo. Love this. I love this style. I really do. I love this kind of found footage or mockumentary with sort of fake talking heads and stuff. I love that. I think it's a really compelling way to tell a story, personally.
Yeah, because it lends it that element of truth. Because you sort of think, oh, this is real.
Yeah.
Or this could be real.
Yeah.
It's set so that it's a clever device to immediately make you think that you are watching a documentary.
Yeah. So it's a mix of kind of talking heads with sort of, again, very sort of immediate looking footage where it looks like there's a cameraman on ground level catching the action in District 9. There's lots of kind of out of focus shots and zooms and everything is kind of handheld, and it feels very much like you've just plonked a documentary filmmaker in the middle of this alien world kind of thing, which is really clever, I think. But what's really interesting, right, is that it gradually loses that. And I remember some people throwing criticism at it, saying it's inconsistent because it just kind of forgets the whole documentary style by midway into the film.
Yeah.
But what did you think of it generally, the way this film looked and the way that evolved?
I didn't mind that at all, because it's, that's our way in.
Yeah.
And it's our way into to Wickus, this main character, which is, I think is done really well, because it shows him as he is trying to put a front on for a film crew. Yes. And then that sort of, that facade slips and dissolves a little bit the more you see him interact with the aliens, with his team, with the people who are above him. Yeah. Everyone hates him. Yes. So that, seeing all of that, which he doesn't seem to realise, everyone, that fascinated me, and the way that that's captured by a documentary crew. That's what I kind of mean about The Office. It's kind of like you see those moments that you wouldn't normally get if you're just watching a film of people, when it lingers a little bit too long and people sort of like rolling their eyes, that sort of stuff.
And it is funny as well, isn't it?
It's really funny.
It's not sort of a pure horror film, really. No. District 9. It's a satire.
It's a satire. 100%. It's a satire. And then it tries to have its cake and eat it a little bit when, for example, they zoom in, I think, on the African gang leader. And you see him sort of being introduced a bit by Wickus, and then they sort of do a 2-shot of him, and one is the documentary shot and the other is just like a side of his face, proper. And I was like, oh, okay. So
and that's exactly it.
That's where they're starting to gradually move it away. But then once it fully leans into that, fine. They've done the introduction, they've done the setup, and now we are just in this world.
Yeah, I think I did notice it more this time around, but I remember first time drawing me in so much that I almost didn't notice. I don't think I noticed. It had gradually stopped becoming a documentary, and
because it brings them back, the talking heads back.
It does at the end, which is again sort of weird, and I can see that some people might find that a bit sort of jarring and inconsistent. A lot of the time with found footage, people would really criticize a found footage film for like, well, what why are we seeing that from that angle? What was that random cutaway we just got? Because you've got to believe why people are filming stuff.
Which is why I don't really like found footage. But I don't think this isn't found footage. It's not
really found footage.
No,
it's a weird hybrid.
Documentary.
It's like its own thing though, because it's not even documentary, is it? But it's documentary for about the first 15 minutes, and then, like you say, as soon as suddenly it starts cutting away to other shots of characters where we think, oh, there's not a cameraman there.
Yeah.
And very shortly into the film, we have the moment when Wickus goes home to his wife, and there's a surprise party, and we're in his home, and we're privy to private conversations, and it's like, well, this isn't being filmed for a documentary.
But that's still done in a documentary style, isn't it?
What's really clever is the whole film is still filmed like handheld. It still looks
I don't think the whole film is it?
Well, mostly. It's still... I think it does still let you feel like you're watching it in that kind of voyeuristic handheld way, but not for a documentary. Just that's the way it's filmed.
Right.
Kind of thing. Yeah. It's pretty cool. I like it. I wouldn't fault the film for it personally.
And I think that kind of experiment pays off. I think it works for this genre, and because they do introduce that conceit, and then they just say, okay, that's there, and now we're just going to show you what else is going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a really nice way, because I think what would have been worse maybe is if it had strained itself to keep that format to the detriment of the story.
Yeah.
Or, they always had to find ways to have a cameraman filming this man who's meant to be hiding, for example, or whatever.
Yeah. And then you suddenly have to think he's in a space for one man, but we have to believe that there's space in there for the cameraman as well, and that they would still be talking and all the rest of it. I totally get that.
Let's talk about Charlton Copley then, who plays Wickus, because again, speaking of Neil Blomkamp and that kind of idea of, one incredible debut and then not so much great ever since.
Yeah.
I kind of sadly feel that way about him. I don't think he's done anything as good as this, but what do you think of Sholto's performance in District 9?
I think he's great because he is such a little worm of a man.
Oh, he's brilliant.
And he's so revolting. And I'm sorry to keep making the really obvious comparison of The Office. It is a really obvious one. But that sort of parallel between this guy who thinks that he's brilliant and high up and that everyone respects him and they just don't, and he's got such a warped view of the world and of himself, and this really like God complex thing. Oh God, he's absolutely horrendous. And you realise that he doesn't realise how horrible he is when he's talking to these prawns and he thinks that he's being the good guy.
Yes.
He very much puts himself in that position and treats them like absolute shit, and it's horrible and it's frightening because it's so insidious. It's the more casual, harmful racism that comes through that where people don't realize or know that scares me the most.
Yeah.
Then when you have like that, you know, the bald-headed military army guy,
the real baddie,
who is like a proper villain, and he knows it.
Yeah.
And we all know it, and it's signposted in a million ways, and we've seen that character a million times. Vickers is so much more interesting and recognizable. I think
he is. You're so right. I mean, I think the Office comparison is accurate, and I think it is. You know, The Office, the British Office was about a decade earlier than this. The American Office was still really popular at this point, right? And he does have that David Brent, Michael Scott kind of vibe, definitely, doesn't he? Like you say, where he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's a bit of a showman.
Yes,
and he's an absolute dickhead, basically, from beginning to end. And actually, he really... Again, I remember in my head him sort of becoming a better person.
Yes.
But he doesn't. He doesn't really. He actually remains a real nasty, selfish piece of work, pretty much.
He's the most narcissistic man as well. And it's always those sort of middlemen who constantly have something to prove.
Yes.
This little guy, hello, sorry.
That's nice, eh?
Yeah, it's fine.
Nice background with the people there. We are here at, must I look?
Yeah, just look straight into the lens, bro.
We are here at MNU Head Office, Department of Alien Affairs. My name is Vickers van der Merwe. And behind me you can see other Alien Affairs workers. And what we do here at this department is we try to engage with the prawn on behalf of MNU and on behalf of humans.
He's married the daughter of his boss as well, who, by the way, the daughter of his boss is like this, you know, beautiful...
Yes. Far too good for him.
Woman.
Yeah.
Who actually ends up betraying him in the most awful way.
Yeah.
So, you know, perhaps not such an ideal woman after all. And her dad, the South African Alan Dale, as we both independently said.
He looks identical to Alan
weird,
Dale.
and has the same, like, slightly villainous attitude.
Yeah, it's true.
Power hungry attitude.
Like
to everything.
rich old patriarch kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true.
I mean, this guy is he takes someone under his wing, right? It's like his first day. He's showing him the ropes. He's trying, but also he doesn't give him bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
Do you remember? He's like, oh, we've only got one bulletproof. Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Like, can I have yours then? No.
I know.
Like, just from that moment, especially, you realise just, you know, how little he cares about anyone else. And then when they start going around all of these shacks, and they end up finding like a pod full of baby aliens, and he burns them alive, and they start popping, and he takes so much pleasure from it, and he's like, listen, it's like popcorn. And then he says, oh look, it's your first abortion. This is you doing your first abortion. Oh my God, it's just horrible. Like made my toes curl. I'd forgotten, I think, just how much of a revolting human being he is, and how little care or patience he has with anybody else, because he can get away with it because he's in government.
And it's that kind of horrible sort of, like you say, it's that sort of slimy bureaucrat evil rather than...
he has a crumb of power and he exploits it to the max. It's like that dinner lady complex.
I think it's really disturbing, this film, because you kind of can believe it as well, couldn't you? Like, this is what would happen maybe if
this is what happens.
If these helpless this is what would would happen if these aliens landed in a place. There would be these ridiculous kind of systems in place, and the fact that they are not really set. They don't really say it overtly until later on in the film, but they're basically planning on moving them all into this concentration camp, right?
Yeah.
And they're sort of saying, look, you're going to go live in these tents and it's going to be much better than where you are at the moment. And it's just something really insidiously disturbing about it, isn't there, from the get-go? And him being the sort of front face of that. And everything he says is full of shit, basically.
He's just like, oh, you need to sign this. You've got 24 hours. They need to sign it because that'll get the human rights groups or the alien rights groups off our backs. And then one guy, I think he gets shot and he falls or something happens, and he like grazes the paper with his hand, and he's like, yep, that'll do, that's a signature. Oh, it's so frightening.
It's really frightening. He's a good character though, because he's a great anti-hero, this guy, isn't he? Because Charlton Copley does such a good job, I think, and he is entertaining.
Oh, he is.
He's hateful, but he's kind of funny because he's such a dweeb, and because everyone else in the film hates him so much as well. And he is, despite how mean-spirited it is, it's quite funny too, don't you think? Like, you do laugh at the satire, and no matter how dark it gets.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to find the humour in it. And actually, there is so much more humour in the human side than there is in the alien side. Because once we're introduced to Christopher Johnson and his little baby boy or girl alien.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really...
No, are they, actually, the aliens even specifically gendered?
No, not that we know of, no.
Because I feel like we only really see or speak to male aliens.
Yes, if they are in fact male.
Yeah,
who knows?
but I think they don't really seem to be gendered particularly. But yeah, as soon as we're with this family, then as soon as there's a child's life more at stake, it becomes so much more desperate, their situation, their scenario. So it's harder to find humour in that side. So they put all of the funny, stupid stuff at Charlton Copley's kind of door, and he fully handles it. Like, he does it so well. He does really manage to tread that line between being a character of pathos, really, but also the village idiot, and then turning into having this sort of arc where he ends up sacrificing himself to save this family, which you just wouldn't have seen coming necessarily.
No, totally. But he sort of only does it because he's literally got nothing left to lose, or to gain. It's like there's no saving him at all, is there? Let's talk about the aliens then. The alien design itself. What do you think of them? Like you said, they're referred to in this kind of pejorative way as prawns, right? By all of the locals.
Fucking prawns.
Yeah. Good accent.
Sorry to all the South African listeners out there.
But, what do you think of the design and the general kind of vibe of these aliens?
I love the designs, actually. I think they're very cool because they look recognizable in some way. They look a bit like the alien in Futurama, with the tendrils at the front of their mouth.
There's something about alien designs, by the way, that always resemble sea creatures, right?
Or vaginas.
Squid-like things, crabs, prawns.
Well, I suppose that is the closest thing we have to aliens on this planet.
Yeah, it is. It's like under the ocean is like a different world. It's like being in space, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they say the same about us. But yeah, I think they look really cool. I love the characteristics of them and the way they move. So they were designed by Weta Studios.
Yes, which is Peter Jackson's. Obviously, we haven't mentioned, but Peter Jackson produced this film. It's his production company, Wingnut, that made it, and his digital effects company, Weta, which obviously became a huge thing during the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He's recently sold that company for $1.6 billion to Unity. So
he's raking it in.
He can live happily ever after on his shire in New Zealand.
Now that he's made his Beatles...
Oh my God, yeah.
Whatever, epic.
Yes, yeah.
He can retire happy.
Yeah. But I think the effects are amazing. Like, I think
it goes back to that sort of they look very practical. It looks more like The Thing in terms of you know, the way that they move, like how realistic they are, they look like practical effects.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's partly the way it's filmed. It all looks very real and very kind of, you know, everything looks sort of like it's there, doesn't it? It looks tangible.
Because it's not stylized.
Yeah.
You know, everything looks muted and a bit grim and gross and dirty and old.
Yeah, it's not shiny.
No, because these aliens have been living in grim conditions for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's why they are literally steeped in filth, and everything they've got of kind of stuff they've found. You see them going through skips and piles of rubbish and everything like that. So there is just this film of grime over absolutely everything, which I think is really it really benefits the movie.
Yes.
Because you don't at any point feel like you're watching something that has just been designed on a computer.
Yeah,
it's
it does feel like that,
it's all
doesn't
rusty
it?
and old.
I think that's right. And also there's just so much humanity in these, like you said, in these aliens too. There's so much warmth in these alien creatures that also kind of helps, doesn't it? I think.
It's like the hesitation in how they move. And again, it's because they haven't been allowed to exist. Like every minute that they spend alive on this planet, they are hated. So they are so hesitant in just their every movement because they know that they will be shot or tortured or whatever.
Yes.
Which we see throughout the film in different various stages.
Yeah.
So when people come knocking on their door and we kind of are introduced to them for the first time, they're like hiding behind their doors. They're clearly really frightened. There's also elements of them being quite aggressive and angry by this point because they've been treated so badly, and they recognize that this is yet another attempt to marginalize them even more. Again, like all really recognizable human characteristics.
And they've done that thing as well, I think, quite cleverly, because they've been there for 20 years. It's just taken as a given that humans understand their language. Like, so they talk in alien language and we see it as subtitled, and the human characters just reply. Like, they just understand them. So it's
Charlton Copley does.
They've been there 20 years. Yes, that's true.
Not all of them do, but yeah, Charlton Copley character does. And so you wonder what that says about him, that he actually did learn these clicks to learn to be able to communicate. That must have been part of his job.
Yeah.
But that is quite interesting, I always think.
Yeah, it's true.
Because I don't think the military guy understands them.
No. Yeah, and I guess it's very much part of his job description to learn it.
Yeah.
But
But you're right. Like you're right about the warmth, like because they move their tendrils in a way that's almost like how we would maybe move our eyebrows. You know, so you can get a lot from the sort of surprise or fear or whatever, and just from these things.
They're so vulnerable, aren't they? Again, like people always imagine that aliens are going to come here and aliens are going to be way stronger and more powerful and more deadly than us.
And they are so strong.
I suppose they are. That's true. But I think it also doesn't necessarily. I mean, they didn't wipe out the humans. They didn't beat us. You know, they were weaker ultimately. But they did have better technology, which I suppose would make sense, because it's like, well, the aliens have managed to come to Earth rather than we've found a way to go to them. They're going to be more technologically advanced than us. So they've got all these amazing weapons. There's this kind of ship that the Christopher has been sort of fixing or building underground from all these different parts of computers and things like that. So they are smarter than us, right? But they're not necessarily as strong or powerful physically.
I suppose because they were so malnourished by the time they arrived, that just put them on such an uneven keel with humans, and so from that moment on they were always sort of had to be enthralled to how the South Africans, what they gave them to eat to survive.
Cat food, which they then like overcharged them for, and oh god, it's so sad. God, because it's all so real.
Yeah,
it is all so real. And also I think the other thing that is quite cool about it, you know, it would have been very easy, I think, to set most of this film at night to kind of hide the CGI, but it's all broad daylight pretty much the whole film, isn't it? Again, it's like it's quite unforgiving, that kind of thing, on CGI effects, and So I think it just feels like it's made with such confidence, doesn't it? This whole film in its format, in its characters, in its effects, in its story. It just feels so sure of itself, which I really like. You know?
100%. And again, for a debut director, no wonder people were so excited.
Well, Peter Jackson clearly had a lot of faith in it.
Yeah. And going back to the design of the prawns, like, you know, their hands are these long kind of, what are they called?
Sort of pincers or something.
Yeah, pincers. So they're sort of weirdly quite ineffectual for certain things, but brilliant for others. But I suppose what's so cool is the moment when you see Vickers morphing into a prawn. And so it's such a weird, grotesque thing to see a human alien hybrid.
Well, yes.
Which is what's so brilliant about the design of it, because it's so different.
This is where the horror really kicks in, isn't it? This moment when Vickers goes into Christopher's house and is rooting around looking for weapons, and he finds that little device that opens up and some black liquid kind of spits out in his face. And from that point onwards, we are now in The Fly, right? We're in like David Cronenberg. One of your least favourite experiences.
I hate that film so much. And there is, you're right, so much of this film is just taken from The Fly.
Now we are literally in The Fly.
Yeah.
It's the same level of body horror, isn't it? Where he begins transforming into something unimaginable in absolute visceral detail, from like pustules to teeth coming out to fingernails.
It's the fingernails and the teeth that both of us are just so repulsed by. As soon as someone pulls off their fingernail, that's it. I have to shut my eyes, turn the film off. I hate it.
Yeah, it's the two worst things, right? Teeth and nails.
Oh my God.
The moment when he bites into some food and he spits his teeth out, and then his first thing that he decides to do is reach into his mouth and pull out the rest, right?
It makes me so angry that people would do that as just like their first instinct. It makes my bum go weird.
And
I hate it.
And you know, the stuff that like his eye kind of turns black and weird as well. And this stuff is real stuff of nightmares, isn't it? I think this kind of transformation, and then what happens to his hand, like you say, turning into that kind of pincer. It's grim.
And the fact that he tries to almost like clip it off, but he can feel it. All the nerves are there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so clever in putting you into that. Like, the pain is very real.
Yes.
It's so real. The torture is very real.
Mm-hmm.
But you almost have to see it through his eyes, because even when we see the prawns being killed themselves or tortured to some extent, we don't necessarily feel that pain in the same way, because we can't imagine.
We don't know what they feel,
Whereas as soon as it becomes Vickers' character that is feeling it and has this extension onto a human body, that's when it becomes so visceral and so realistic and something that we can put ourselves into his body.
It's right. And then suddenly the arrogant straight white guy becomes the marginalized person in this film.
The victim.
He becomes the victim, the outsider. No one wants to go near him. Everyone wants to basically kill him and dissect him. And he ends up hiding out in this camp, chewing on, like, eating cat food, basically, doesn't he?
Classic of a white guy, just to make it all about him. No, but it's true. It is true. He suddenly becomes our way in, our eyes into just how dreadful this situation can be. But he is, he's kind of hoisted by his own petard, really. He did it to himself. And again, it goes back to that absolute fear of looking stupid.
Yeah.
Where when he initially sprays that stuff and he's like, oh my God, don't film this, turn it off, because he doesn't want to look like an idiot.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And the cameraman's like, yeah, we'll cut all that out.
Oh, and that moment when you see him throwing up, and like it's like the cameraman sort of has to go sort of follow him round to the back of a hut where he's like spewing his guts out onto the ground. Yeah.
And when he throws up all over his like promotion cake.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
Which is of a government building, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just great. Like that detail is really funny.
Yeah, really funny. Yeah. So there's no actual mention, obviously, and this, to be fair, is set in the present day in 2009. Apartheid kind of ended in the 90s, but there's no sort of mention of that at all. And actually, race, in terms of human race, isn't really a thing, is it, in this film? As in, like, well, I suppose there are...
I think it very much is a thing.
Yeah.
I think because when you see in the ghettos and the slums, you see the Nigerians are the black Nigerians are the ones who are the criminals. They're peddling weapons.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are hoiking up prices of cat food to try and con the aliens, all that kind of stuff. They're portrayed in a very stereotypical criminal gang kind of way.
That's true.
And then you have like white government officials. But yeah, there is definitely a class and race divide there. Yeah, it sort of plays with these stereotypes, for example, of witch doctors and voodoo, because you see like this African gang leader being told that he needs to eat an alien to sort of imbibe its powers and its strength, and which is again ultimately his downfall. But again, that feels very much like through the lens of a stereotypical look at African culture.
I can't make up my mind about whether it needed the Nigerian sort of gang lord plot strands of this film. Do you know what I mean? Like there was enough horror from the kind of human characters that we were subjected to in the government and everything else, right? Without also having this, like you say, quite stereotypical view of these kind of gang lords and weapon dealers and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there didn't seem to be that. I think they put so much into, obviously, the aliens being other and being demonized, and of course that is all, as we said, a metaphor for what happened between black and white Africans.
Yes.
But it perhaps wasn't quite, maybe was a bit too forgiving of the way that actually African people are treated in this film.
Yeah, it's and I think it does a really good job, obviously, like we said, of kind of laying that metaphor out very clearly with the aliens and the humans. But I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure how it feels a little bit more unsure of itself when it comes to how it deals with, you know, actual racial divide amongst the humans in this.
Yes,
like, is that still a thing? Isn't it? What stereotypes are they playing and what stereotypes are they subverting?
Yes. Is it like, has that now been forgotten in the wake of these aliens? But actually, would 20 years of aliens be enough for black South Africans to forget the years and years of apartheid that they themselves have gone through?
And in this world, did the apartheid end in the 90s as it did in real life?
Yeah.
You know, like what happened with that? They don't explain any of that, obviously.
There's also this footage, isn't there, of kind of rioting and uprisings, and that again of black communities that are rioting and uprising. And
so that's interesting.
Yeah, so I do think there is very much still a racial commentary going on, whether it's aware of it or not. I mean, we, don't forget that Neil Blomkamp is a white South African director.
Yeah.
So
how different would it have been if Vickers was a black man who was started off as this kind of dweeby government dickhead and then becomes this victimized, marginalized?
Yeah.
I wonder how differently that might have been
read. I think it would have been a completely different story.
Yeah, so that's interesting, isn't it? The rest of the film basically is kind of him on the run, isn't it? There's that horrendous moment when he is captured by the government, when they found out he's been, his DNA is blended with an alien, and they try and do all these experiments on him. They make him shoot these poor aliens.
Oh God, that was so awful.
Because he can control the guns, because their guns are kind of biological, aren't they? And then meanwhile, Christopher has found, like, basically has been building or fixing this little sort of shuttle, right, that is hidden underground under his tent.
It sort of fell off the ship, and then I think they have footage of people saying that they looked and they could never find it.
Yeah.
And so he found it and has been fixing it underneath his shed.
So I think Vickers kind of says, look, I'll help you go home if you can help cure me, I think, right? And so they end up kind of working together. It becomes almost like a sort of dysfunctional buddy movie, doesn't it, at that point?
Briefly it does,
very briefly, sadly, because it's quite nice at that point. And then we get that great final act where, Christopher does kind of very slowly ascend to the mothership while...
Oh my God, it's so slow,
it's so
that
tense.
shuttle.
It takes so long to get up there. And meanwhile, you've got all these soldiers, all these, shootings, helicopters, and Vickers gets into that amazing
Transformers suit thing.
like bodysuit thing. It's really cool with all its guns and everything. But what do you think of that whole sort of final battle, that final act?
It's really cool because, again, it's quite shonky almost. It's not like he just goes out and annihilates everyone. He sort of manages to, but he's also trying to run away because he is still a coward. Let's not forget. And up until almost the very end, he even says, "Kill Christopher Johnson.
Yes.
Save me, spare me. I'll go. You have him." He literally says that, and I was like, "Oh, I can't believe he said that." After all that they'd been through at this point together, knowing that he had this little child waiting for him.
That child alien is adorable
as well. Oh my God, so sweet. Yeah. Anything miniature is sweet.
Absolutely adorable. Yeah.
And then
it's basically like E.T. for adults, this film. It's like you just want to cry at the treatment of this poor alien.
Yes. and then he does finally have a change of heart when he realizes, as we said at the beginning, that he's his wife, he's lost his wife has betrayed him, his job is not getting that back. He's literally losing his humanness.
Yes.
His body is failing him, his eyes are changing, everything is changing, and he's left with the promise that Christopher Johnson will come back and save him in 3 years.
Yes.
He'll return in 3 years. It's a really sort of poignant, sad ending.
It is. It's a really bittersweet ending, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the characters that we like the most, i.e. Christopher and his son or daughter, Christopher and his child, get away.
Yeah.
And so you're really pleased for that.
Yes.
But there are millions of other aliens left that are going to be put in these camps.
Yeah.
There is Vickers, who has transformed and will probably never turn back and has lost everything. Not that we feel that sorry for him, but it's still.
But they do manage to still make you feel a little bit.
They do, yeah.
Which is quite clever, considering we know everything that he's put everyone through. But I suppose just that element of self-sacrifice at the very end.
Yeah.
And also that incredible suit is wicked. I really love how it disintegrates in front of our eyes, and he's running away and it gets shot in the leg, so he can't run anymore, but he can still shoot, and then things are leaking onto him, and there's so much tension. It's so tense by the end.
It's really good, isn't it? Yeah, that suit also reminds me a bit of Iron Man. You know, where you get the inside view of his face inside it. This was, 1 year after the first Iron Man film.
Yeah.
I wonder if that had any influence on it. But you're right. And Transformers, it has all of that. Even Avatar, isn't there something in Avatar where they get in those big kind of robot suits?
I don't know. It was too long ago.
Well, and that was the same year as District 9, wasn't it? But I think there was something like that.
Yeah, and it ends the scene that I remembered the most clearly from District 9 was the final scene with his wife being left this sort of little tin rose.
Oh yeah,
that he's made for her. And then you just see him again standing really uncertainly outside, and she's like, "I'm sure he's still around," and he obviously is. And it is quite a heartbreaking image of him just having no voice, having no body.
Yeah.
Like a no human body that's recognisable.
And they finish with a little flashback to him at the beginning in the documentary, don't they? At his desk, showing the picture of his wife and talking about her as well. Yeah. So it is quite clever the way it shows you that complete transformation that we've just witnessed across this whole film. I mean, it's sad. Yeah, it's like the end of The Fly. It's sad. It is sad.
Bloody Fly.
So there you go. That's District 9. It's still, I mean, in my head, it's still a very recent film. It's now, 11 years old. But
that's quite recent.
That's quite recent, relatively. But do you still think it sort of holds up?
Oh, yeah. It really does. And again, it's because I don't think they don't rely on loads and loads of special effects for this.
No.
It doesn't feel like it's been done to death since either.
No.
I don't think it doesn't feel like it's been aped loads, which makes a difference. I don't think you could really tackle this because it's so unique in many different ways.
Yeah, I agree. It's like it's in some ways it's interesting that it hasn't dated because it's so specific of a time and place, but then also like we've been discussing this whole time, there's something very universal about it at the same time, isn't there? There is something sort of timeless about it.
Yeah.
Which works so well. It's just a really good story, isn't it? With a surprising amount of heart to it, I think, considering how horrible and gross it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to Charlton Copley's performance.
Yeah.
Because he does such a great job of not just being that sort of smug government stooge, but also when he really goes into shock, the pain and the fear that he's feeling, he does that. He portrays that so well.
I've still not forgiven him for his performance in the Old Boy remake as the villain. It's truly dreadful.
I forgot that was him.
And to be fair, that's probably Spike Lee kind of directing him to perform that way. But he's very like camp Dr. Evil villain in that film, and I hated it. I hated that whole remake. I thought it was terrible.
Agreed. I think, you know, the fact that his wife loves Vickers so much is maybe like one redeeming feature, which I'm glad they don't really lose. By the end of it, I think that's why we keep the poignancy because of her love for him, which is very sweet.
Even
though he's a cunt.
Even though he's a bastard. Yeah, it's true. I love it. Well, there you go. Well, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this excellent film. And my final question for you is, what's your favourite alien sci-fi horror film?
I think it is The Thing.
Yeah, The Thing over Alien.
I think so. I think I just really fancy Kurt Russell.
All right.
No, I just think the practical effects in The Thing are so fun.
Yeah.
I think I get more scared in Alien. Yes. And I really enjoy Alien. I really do. I think maybe that's probably my second favourite Alien film of all time. But The Thing was just really, when I first saw it, because I saw it quite late, and it was really special. It really stayed with me. And I loved it. I just fell in love with every aspect of it. It looked so amazing. The isolation of it. And I know I should probably say Alien because it's got an incredible female role at the heart of it. But there was just something about The Thing.
Oh, yeah. The Thing is better than Alien. I agree.
Okay.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And just remind people where they can find you and more of your work out there online. And all your millions of podcasts that are out right now.
I've just done a House of Gucci podcast. So you can listen to me interviewing Lady Gaga if you want.
Lady Gaga, Adam Driver, Ridley Scott.
Yeah, well, right? Ridley Scott, he did talk about Alien.
Yeah.
He loves to talk about every other film he's ever
loves
done.
It.
He's great.
I love Ridley Scott because he's sort of curmudgeonly, but also quite fun.
Yeah,
at the same
he
time.
is fun. He's also 83. Like, if you can't be curmudgeonly at 83.
Exactly. He's earned the right to be a bit grumpy.
Yes. So House of Gucci podcast. I do a Radio Times podcast every week talking about latest TV and streaming. And you can catch me every Monday morning on 6 Music with Lauren Levan.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
점점 엄마 닮아간다. 그게 평생부터다냐? 유령처럼.
Hello everybody, that was a little clip you just heard there from the brilliant The Tale of Two Sisters from 2003, a spectacular, terrifying Korean horror film, and that is a little snippet, a little hint of what we've got going on over on Patreon this week. For $10 patrons, we kicked off a brand new miniseries, a globe-trotting around the world horror miniseries. Each episode in this miniseries, we're going to take a different country from around the world, look at its horror traditions in cinema, and discuss a movie from that country in spoilerific detail. This week, for part 1, I was joined by the wonderful Stacey Ponder, and together we discussed Korean horror. We recommended some of our favourite Korean horrors from the last 20 years, including The Host, The Wailing, Train to Busan, and a bunch of others, and then we finished with a deep dive review of the terrifying Tale of Two Sisters. It was such a brilliant discussion. That episode is available for $10 patrons right now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. If you sign up at a $5 level, you'll get at least 2 bonus episodes per month, but if you sign up at a $10 level, you'll get a bonus episode every single week, including access to said mini seasons. You can also sign up at a $20 level and get all of that content, plus become an Evolution of Horror sponsor and get your own little segment in the middle of an episode right here. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. Everybody who signs up, no matter what tier, will also get a special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thanks. So a big thank you to Elliot Walthall, Nogaflation, Pablo Arangaran, Priscilla M. Rodriguez Garcia, Joe Housin, Lord Sepulcrave, Greg Olliart, Aaron M. Travis, Dyson Windsor, Dylan, Snorri Rakedal, Theodore Rawson, Phil H, Mark Oswald, Cindy Sherman, your new best friend, Steve Baldwin, Katia Sellen, Katie Island, Katie, Franciscan Ponk, Caitlin Piera, Jessica, DK, and Alexis. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up. And one more time, if you want to join them and get treated to regular bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. That's patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Okay, let's dive into the second half of this week's episode, and it's time to discuss Attack the Block. I sat down with friend of the pod, journalist, critic, broadcaster, and born and bred South Londoner Lou Thomas to discuss Attack the Block in spoilerific detail. Enjoy.
Oh, that's different. That ain't even the same thing. That looks triple the size blend.
Everyone run! We need to get off the streets. Back in the block.
What kind of alien would invade some shitty council estate in South London?
One that's looking for a fight.
Hello, welcome back, Lou Thomas. Hi, Lou.
One time in your mind, I'm here once again.
Love it. How are you, Lou? It's a busy time right now, isn't
it? Mate, I feel like I've used this expression before on the pod, long-time listeners. I'm sure you'll have heard me say it before, but I'm, as Alan Partridge would say, working like a Japanese prisoner of war, only a happy one. There you go.
Perfect. There we go. I'm excited to discuss this film with you, Lou. First of all, let me ask you a little bit about this subgenre we're covering at the moment, alien films, sci-fi horror. Are you a fan generally? Do you kind of gravitate towards sci-fi horror and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it would be, if not my absolute favourite horror subgenre, it's certainly very, very close to the top.
Oh, nice.
Because obviously you've got, as we know, well, I mean, you could say it's about any subgenre horror, any subgenre, full stop.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that there are some great directors that work not just in genre, but in all sorts. When you've got, people like Ridley Scott, making Alien and things like that. What's the sci-fi one where they it's Donald Sutherland and I've forgotten.
Oh yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
How can I forget Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Literally, like it's one of the big. I've been thinking about it all week, and then suddenly it's like when your mate crops up and you introduce him, but you can't introduce him. One of those, Sorry,
that's a great film. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
The original and the obviously the remake and whatever, and you got The Thing, and there's where like aliens cross into horror. Love it, mate. Love it.
So good, isn't it? Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about this film in particular with you. Let's get straight into it, shall we? We're going to talk about Attack the Block. Lou, set us up. Give us a little plot synopsis of Attack the Block.
Okay, well, it starts with got to start with the opening shot. The opening shot is terrific. You're looking up at the night sky, and what looks like a comet is coming down out of the sky, but it's not. It's obviously an alien invasion. The first little spot of an alien invasion. The camera sort of cranes down from the sky. It's fireworks. There's fireworks banging away everywhere, and you see we're in wonderful, beautiful, the best place in the world, my glorious South London.
We are. We're in Oval Station, right?
We are. We're looking south from, I believe, Kennington Park Road, and you can see, if you look very carefully, I think you can see Battersea Power Station in the far south distance. Mm-hmm. But yeah, where we are, like I say, is looking directly at Oval Tube, and then to the right you've got Harleyford Road going off towards Vauxhall, and then you go straight down, and as if you were going, you're looking down towards Stockwell. There you go.
That's right.
So that's if we want to get specific about things, and Mike, that I love being specific.
I love it.
That's exactly where we are. And where we are is we see a young woman walking out the tube. Mm-hmm. She's on her way home. And she is Jodie Whittaker, who is Doctor Who currently, as we speak. Doing a great job as Doctor Who. She's been in other stuff, but that's what most people know her for. So she is a nurse. She's a young nurse, and she's walking home, and she comes across a young gang of teenage lads, and the ringleader is a big, imposing-looking dude called Moses. Yeah. And this is played by John Boyega, who much more on later. But he says, right, give us your phone and your purse and all that bag and all that stuff, and give us your rings and so on. And he pulls a knife on her, doesn't use it, but he throws her to the ground and that. And it's pretty unsettling, I'll be honest with you.
It is.
But what's kind of believable about that particular bit is that it's like that is kind of realistic, because not every mugging that happens in London ends in a murder, although if you read certain newspapers you might believe that's the case. But then again, not everyone is mega friendly either, so the level of aggro and the level of violence seems like something you would probably expect. It's unpleasant, there is no two ways about it, and you're thinking these lads are scumbags and the truth of the matter is there are loads and loads of kids like that in London. But there you go. That's by the by, because suddenly more of these things come down, and they're all startled by this basically alien creature that crawls out. And at this point, we see the creature, and there's a few of them, but there's one that comes down, and it looks, for anyone who's seen Critters, imagine a beach ball sized, or even bigger than a beach ball, I'd say somewhere between a beach ball and a beanbag sized round, spiky, dark hedgehog thing with no eyes and glowing sort of teeth.
Yeah, that's it.
And basically that's kind of the start of it. And then
it's basically aliens versus gangs, essentially.
It's aliens versus a gang. But of course, South London gangs have probably taken on tougher things than aliens invading, and that is very much the theme of it. These boys are like, no one can mess with us.
It's so good, isn't it? It's such a fun premise. What do you think of the film generally, Lou? Are you a fan of Attack the Block?
I was a big fan, and I remain a big fan. So I saw it when it came out. This was pre my film journalism days by a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I think.
Same.
But I saw it at the cinema, loved it at the time, revisited it probably a couple of years ago, really loved it, revisited, just a few days ago to watch this, and it definitely stands up. Now, there are a few reasons for this, which we can get into. So one of the things is that, as I kind of hinted at a minute ago, there is an authenticity to it, despite the fact that it is, an alien invasion film. There is an because... For a start, Joe Cornish, the writer and director of it, he lived in Brixton himself for many years. Most people of a certain age will know Joe Cornish as Adam Buxton's partner. They used to have a TV show called The Adam and Joe Show.
Absolutely.
Which in the first season, they actually shot it in a bedsit, and then I think they recreated the bedsit in a studio in later seasons. But it was done on the cheap. It was late night Channel 4. They did all sorts of like mad little puppet recreations of films. They did all sorts of bizarre stuff, like they'd go in a local Brixton shop and they'd look at a chocolate bar or a box of cereal, and they'd do things like, oh, this says 20% free, so they'd eat the 20% free, and the shopkeeper would look at them and go, what? And all the locals in Brixton would look at them like they were nutters. And that's the sort of stuff they used to do. So it was that sort of irreverence. Now, without a doubt, Joe Cornish took that irreverence and his South London living to influence this film, because number one, there's loads of lingo in it. There's loads of like what you'd call, if you wanted to call it, you'd call it, youth lingo or South London lingo, like get me and fam and all these sort of expressions and phrases that pretty much everyone in South London will use at some point or another. You may not use them all the time, but there are definitely the language used and the way the characters speak to each other is certainly not a million miles away from me and some of my pals. You know what I mean? Really? So there you go. That's one side of it. But what's also quite interesting is, although some of it, the interiors were shot at Free Mill Studio and a few other places, the housing estate that most of the action, hence the block of the title, is a block on the estate they live in. It's a fictional block, but it's actually, they shot the film over, I want to say 6 or 8 weeks of night shoots on the Haygate estate, which was a big estate at Elephant and Castle, which was next to the Aylesbury, and the two were like basically the biggest, if not the biggest social housing estate in Europe, then it was among that sort of size. You had the Beamerton estate in Islington, which is kind of off Cali Road, and then you got Myattsfield, which is sort of, for anyone who knows Brixton, it's sort of up Brixton Road, sort of on the right-hand side where Angeltown is. It's kind of that area. So basically, they shot around those areas. And when you look at it now, it's kind of interesting. It's sort of a half social history document, because the Haygate estate for anyone who knows Walworth and Elephant and Castle, the Elephant and Castle, where it looks now, is completely different to how it looked when it was shot.
Yeah.
It's all been bulldozed. It's a lot of new build houses. There's some social housing there, but essentially what we're talking about is social cleansing, as we know that's happened in London. I've talked about this before on the pod for different things, but it's there's been gentrification, so that area now looks nothing like it. So when you're seeing these walkways and stuff, and these tower blocks and so on, a lot of that is no longer there. So that's kind of interesting.
It is.
So that gives it that. But yeah, these kids, like I say, what I like about it is they do talk. They are more or less authentic, but they're just trying to sort of survive and get by. But they're not, they're not nice kids. No. At all. They're basically scumbags. These kids, they're muggers. Of course, they do redeem themselves by, in a sense, no spoilers, but it's pretty obvious, by, in a sense, saving the world. Certainly, whether you want to talk about the world, certainly saving the block and their neighbourhood. Yeah. And, people say charity begins at home. I don't know about that, but I do know that in this life, we want to protect the people that are immediately around us, and that means our friends, our family, our neighbourhood, whatever. And I know we've talked about this before as well, but I know certainly how proud and how protective I am of my city and my neighbourhood, wherever I happen to live. So I totally get that. And ultimately, you go back far enough, and that's really what are all gang wars and what a turf war is all about. They're like, you're from that neighbourhood, I'm from this neighbourhood. Don't you come here or you're going to get a slap. Yeah. And that is what it all boils down to. And this is kind of that, but in extremis.
Yeah, it's true. And there's even a line, isn't there, where John Boyega's character says, after he's mugged Jodie Whittaker, later he says, I wouldn't have done that to you if I'd known you lived on this block, kind of thing. Because again, there is that feeling of we're all one community in this place.
I've seen you around there before, You lived there long?
A couple of months.
Nice place you got.
Thanks. Thinking of moving.
Shame. Why?
I don't like the area.
Now, what do you mean you don't like that area? And what's wrong with that area?
There is a sort of authenticity to it. You're born and bred South London, and I remember very clearly this was 2011. This was the year that I moved to London, and I moved to East Dulwich in South London. So I was like 5-10 minutes from there. And it does have a kind of authenticity. And I think, I read that Joe Cornish was sort of making this film a little bit... He was mugged, and he when he lived in South London, he was partly basing it on his own experiences of when he first moved to South London. But also, he didn't want to paint that gang as just like two-dimensional evil as well. And he was also making this film as a response to a lot of horror movies that had come up to that point recently, like Eden Lake and stuff, where it was just like evil hoodies are killing people and attacking people, right? And I think he does do a good job, doesn't he, of, like you said, the opening scene, you kind of think these kids are scumbags, and then you start to sort of warm to them, don't you, as the film goes on, which I loved.
Oh, yeah, completely. And, there's some good actors for a start. John Boyega, we all know about. Obviously gone on to do Star Wars and
I know. Well, I love it, right? That opening scene with the mugging, and I'm like, oh my God, little did we know this was Doctor Who and a stormtrooper, right, coming up against each other in South London at this point. It's amazing.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, like I say, those two, certainly Jodie Whittaker is, a big star in Britain because of Doctor Who and whatever, and John Boyega, is known. He's like now a global presence, because if you do Star Wars, if you've got a big part in Star Wars, you are globally known, and that's cool. Yeah. Which is great, and he still does plays and stuff, and he still does, still knocks about in South London. So good for him. That's what I would say. But like even around the cast, so there's a guy called there's two younger kids in it, Probs and Mayhem.
I love them. Yeah,
they're really funny. They're like the junior gang members. And Mayhem is a guy played by a young fella called Michael, I want to pronounce this right, Ajayo, I think is how you pronounce it. And he's actually got a small but pretty good part in Last Night in Soho.
Yes.
He plays sort of the lead character's one of the lead character's only real friends in it.
Yeah, sort of love interest figure, isn't he?
Sort of is. It's a little. You could argue that his part in that is a little bit underwritten.
Yes.
But that's okay. He's clearly destined for bigger things, and he's a really charismatic guy and a nice bloke. Met him, just last month actually. Nice guy. But he's going places. And then if you look around, even like behind the scenes, Joe Cornish we know about, like I said, I spoke about his past. Yeah. But he also went on to write Tintin and co-wrote Ant-Man with, Edgar Wright and stuff. And, I think he worked with Spielberg on Tintin. Yeah. And so he's... there's rumours. Well, there's a little bit of chat about a sequel, but we'll come to that in a bit. But Joe Cornish, I think, is also working on Lockwood and Co., which is a kind of based on the books about like a psychic detective agency.
Oh, nice.
So that could be something quite interesting.
Yeah.
So the guy who shot it, and actually, it's a great looking film. So it's there's some really good shots, like along the floor when he's sort of creeping around corridors and stuff.
Yeah.
It's very Carpenter-ish.
Yes.
Very Carpenter-esque, you might say. What's the guy? Tom Townend is the cinematographer in this. Now, he, although this is a great film, he went on to shoot a film I love, You Were Never Really Here, which is like one of the great films of the last 5 years.
What a film.
Which is horrific and thrilling in its own right.
Yeah.
You know, Lynn Ramsey's film, I'm sure all your listeners have heard of that film. If you have not heard of it, you really got to see it.
It's incredible.
And it looks great. And like I say, Tom Townend, who shot this, also shot that. Now, so it looks great. It sounds really good because you've got a guy called Stephen Price who would later do the sound for Gravity and won an Oscar for his sound work on Gravity. So that gives you an idea of the sort of quality of the guy. And it may not surprise anyone who knows anything about South London or Brixton to know that Basement Jaxx worked with Stephen Price on some of the music as well. So when you hear there's stuff that sounds like really Larry kind of grime stuff, I'm pretty sure that is the Basement Jaxx influence, because Basement Jaxx, for those of you who don't know, well, you should own all their records. If you've not heard Red Alert or Bingo Bango or Rendezvous, I mean, they've got banger after banger after banger, Basement Jaxx, and they are like one of the Brixton.
It's one of my favourite live gigs I've ever been to was Basement Jaxx.
Right.
They're so good.
Right, amazing live band, loads of great records.
Yeah.
So it's only right, really, that Joe Cornish, being a Brixton fella, has employed these two, and they're on as well. So yes, so musically it's great. It looks the part, and it's got loads of good people, and it's also got a good part as Nick Frost plays a drug dealer who lives in a high-rise flat.
Yes.
Lives at the top of the flats with a massive room of weed that he's growing, or that the people he's working with are growing. So it's full of talent.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, and it's interesting because Edgar Wright is the exec producer as well, I think, on this, isn't it? And I remember that. I don't know whether it was almost a bit unfairly so kind of compared to Shaun of the Dead. I remember that at the time, and I remember even Mark Kermode giving it a bit of a lukewarm review by basically saying it wasn't as good as Shaun of the Dead. But I think he's going for a different kind of thing to Edgar Wright with Shaun of the Dead, don't you think? You know, it's not as leaning into that comedy as much as Shaun of the Dead did, I think, you know?
Well, for a start, Shaun of the Dead is obviously a bit more middle class than even though you know you've got Nick Frost plays a bit of a loser in both, which he does, and even though you know Shaun works in a shop, but he's essentially a middle class bloke slumming it, really.
Definitely,
in Shaun of the Dead, you know, he's a bloke who's probably done a degree, probably his mum and dad own their own home, you know, all these usual indicators of what middle class is or isn't, and we can have that debate here in a pub. I feel like I've had the what is middle class and what is working class chat a million times. Anyway, whereas this is very much set on a council, set on a social housing estate. You know, everyone lives there, is working class or thereabouts. I mean, she's a nurse and she's maybe not quite, but it does have more of that authenticity that people have probably been around.
Yeah.
But,
and I think there's something really interesting, isn't there, between the Jodie Whittaker character and John Boyega's character as these kind of... There's sort of two different types of people you get living in South London right now these days, right? You must have seen a big difference, Lou, growing up in this area from how different it was from when you were young to now, because obviously it's filled with rich white people, right? It's you know, and I think... with that sort of tension and rivalry between Jodie Whittaker and John Boyega, there is that sort of representation there of those two different types of people that live in South London. And I think it's exploring that idea of gentrification as well amongst all this other stuff.
It is, isn't it? It's almost like that bit of it is almost like a metaphor, really.
Yeah.
When you're talking about it on those terms. And without a doubt, certainly in my lifetime, things are like, if you walk through South London now, it's barely, bits of it are barely recognisable, you know.
Yeah.
Which is some of its progress. Yeah, it is. I mean, what's happened to the housing market has happened to the housing market in most big cities in the world. So you can't. It's, you know, the whole thing where, you know, it's unaffordable to live in big swathes of the capital city, which it is. But there's more reasons than just people moving in. You know, it's not just about people moving in. It's about the housing stock not getting replenished and rebuilt, and all, you know, and then council housing getting sold off, and then the ones that are being rebuilt, there's not as many, and there's loads of little factors that go into why the city has become what it has and unaffordable and all this sort of stuff. But without a doubt, this is kind of, you know, this is inadvertently sort of captured a little bit, or maybe advertently captured a little bit of it, you know.
It feels like it has. Even it even made me think now, in context of watching it now, of stuff like Grenfell and stuff, and like this idea of like these communities all kind of, you know, put into these high-rise towers essentially, and kind of left to fend for themselves almost. And I think that's kind of interesting, and it sort of touches upon all of that stuff, I think, Attack the Block, in quite an interesting way, you know.
Oh yeah, completely.
Where have you been? Got to get the puncture repair kit, Mum. Why? You're not going out again? Just to mend my tyre. 10 minutes, I swear. Hey, 10 minutes, I mean it. I promise.
What happened to your leg?
Nothing, Nan. I pulled a muscle playing football.
There's a bit in the film where, so all these kids have been out all evening, right? And they're like, right, what we got to do is we got to get tooled up by any means necessary, and we're going to go out and we're going to spank these aliens, basically. That's their vibe, yeah?
Yeah.
So you're like, wicked, right, great. So they all, the sort of 4 or 5 main kids in the gang, they go back to their respective homes, and it's just brilliant because within each little, I don't know, vignette is probably the wrong word, but within each sort of mini sequence of that, you get an insight into their home lives. Mm-hmm. So you've got one kid who goes home and he's like, oh yeah, I just need my puncture repair kit. I've got a flat tire or something, which is hilarious. And his mum's like, oh, all right, you know. And then there's one kid who goes to his gran, because that's the thing. There are a lot of kids, not just in the States, there are a lot of kids because their own parents have problems or might die, or drug problems or prison or whatever. There are a lot of kids who are brought up by their grandparents.
Yeah.
And so there's one kid who's brought up by his gran. And like I said, there's one kid who's like, oh, well, puncture repair kit. And then when you see Moses, this is the thing. You don't see Moses' home until the end, and this is probably something quite clever that Jo Cornish has done in the writing of it. Jodie Whittaker goes into Moses' flat near the end, and it's like, oh, who lives here? And he's like, oh, yeah, do you live here alone? It's like, no, it's just me and my uncle. And it's like, the place is a real tip, like, ain't been cleaned in weeks, and it's just bad.
Yeah.
You know? It is like, oh my God, that's... he's obviously saying, well, this is part of the reason why he's turned into that, because his mum and dad ain't on the scene, are they? You know?
It's what's really clever about it, isn't it? Because it begins and you kind of think, right, you're really very much aligned with Jodie Whittaker. She walks out of that station and you really feel for her.
Yeah.
And you really do think these people are, like you said, scumbags, right? They're monstrous at the beginning. And then it really does change your perception. As the film goes on, suddenly John Boyega or Moses becomes our sort of main character. And you do really feel for him. That moment when she goes into his flat. And it's not just that he lives with his uncle who's like never there. But also she goes into his bedroom and she goes, have you got a little brother? And he goes, no. And it's like you suddenly realise as well that these are just children, right? They are kids. They're like, 14, maybe 15, some of them. And it's like, it's that sudden realisation that these people that society kind of vilifies, I suppose, they're just children, aren't they? That have grown up in these horrendous... And the film, I think, does such a really good, not like preachy, not too obvious, but like a really good way of kind of getting that across, I think. Let me ask you just generally about the performances, because again, we've touched upon this, but these were people that were pretty unknown at the time, weren't they? And now, like we said, we've got a kind of like a Jedi and a Time Lord amongst various other people. What do you think of John Boyega's performance in this?
Oh, he's great, yeah. I want to say it's his first screen performance, or certainly his first film performance.
I think it is.
There is, although he is a thug, which he is, it's like, you know, he controls his crew, and it's like he leads. He's like, what I love about it is the fact that from a young age, and he wasn't that old when he made this, he is a leader. Like straight away, you can see it, and it's like it must be said, he's a good-looking chap, right?
Yeah,
he's a good-looking geezer. He's forthright. He's like, he's by all, I mean, I've not met him, but by all accounts, he's actually a really, really nice guy.
Yeah,
But he plays this Eve, this not Eve, obviously, but this bloke who is young kid who's like, yeah, mug it, take your money.
Yeah, he's quite threatening at the beginning.
You know what I mean? And he looks the part and everything. It's like, great bit of casting.
Well, yeah, and what's really interesting about him is that, yes, like, he is really threatening at the beginning, and then he has that vulnerability, doesn't he, as it goes on? Like we've talked about, you see his bedroom and you find out a bit more about him, and there's that moment when he's actually sort of almost got sort of, he's got tears coming from his eyes where he's talking about his kind of home life and that kind of thing. And I think it's really interesting that he has ended up being an actor that has played not those types of roles. So, like, for example, in Star Wars, he is sort of the softer character, isn't he? He's the sort of comedy, sidekicky kind of character to Daisy Ridley's sort of star. Like, he's not the thug, he's not the baddie, he's not the, like, tough guy. And that's really interesting. And I think, you know, like, after Attack the Block, that's the role he ended up getting famously. It's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously in the old days you would have thought, oh, God, right, you know, black geezer gets typecast, gets put in some crappy roles, you know, plays the thug, plays the villain, whatever. But actually, yeah, like you say, I mean, he's definitely done some interesting parts. I mean, obviously, Star Wars, like you say, he's good because he starts off as a villain and becomes a goodie. Well, actually, a bit like Attack the Block.
A little bit like Attack the Block, yeah.
He is, and actually, like, I know this, I'm shameless and awful because I am. But when I interviewed Ryan Coogler on Black Panther, great. Oh well, I know, Mike. You know, see, this is it, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone listening to this, in case Mike doesn't edit this out, right? Mike's interviewed loads and loads and loads of people. I've interviewed loads and loads of people because that's our job, right? Okay, so don't hate us for doing our jobs. But the truth of the matter is, I interviewed Ryan Coogler on Black Panther, and obviously he was wicked, and obviously I really enjoyed Black Panther, blah, blah, blah. But I said to Ryan Coogler, all right then, who'd be your next James Bond? Because even then they were talking about next James Bond. And he goes, yeah, you know, John Boyega, your man John Boyega, who's got the skill for it, he's got this for it, he's blah, blah, blah. He said, I met him last night, and we were at a party or we were at a thing, and he said, yeah. So if you see Ryan Coogler, whether Ryan Coogler would ever get the Bond gig, I don't know, but whether... if you see John Boyega even get a Bond or a Bondish character, or you see Ryan Coogler and John Boyega work together, don't be surprised because like they've obviously got a bit of a thing there.
That's very cool. So that's very cool. So we've talked so much about the kind of real life stuff, the social stuff, the performances. Let's talk about the aliens themselves. Because I think this is the first time. Well, I've covered a lot of alien films over the last few months, right? They're always weird, creepy, spidery, slimy, grey, whatever. This is the first time I've seen aliens like this in a film. They look like proper animals. They're furry with teeth, right? And I kind of love the design. What do you think of the look and vibe of these actual alien creatures?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think they had they shot it, I think, practically with some people in suits or whatever, and then they CGI'd it after. But when you look, and actually when I was sort of taking a close eye at it, I was looking, it's like, does this look, and when you look in the CGI is really, really good, because although you're kind of like, yeah, this isn't real, your brain is like, oh, it kind of looks actually quite realistic. It looks pretty good. And I think, like you say, mate, they're the aliens are like, ooh, they do look, and they chew people up, and they're like animals. They're attracted to pheromones. So just to clue you in on a bit that a mild tangent, not my usual 10 minutes going off on some random dark alley. Mild tangent here. The big bit of the plot is the aliens all head towards the block that the main characters live in. The reason they do that is because John Boyega has killed. I think John Boyega has killed a female.
Yeah, that's right, and brought the body back to that, like the top floor flat, right in the block.
And that's why they're all sort of following. So, and when you see them move, they move up the side of the tower block, and you see them sort of hunt around the corridors. And yeah, I mean, you are aware that, oh, hold on, this isn't totally happening. But because it's shot in such a way, and because, Mike, like you say, because the aliens look like believable aliens, you're like, oh, God, okay, well, you're part of your brain suspends this disbelief while you're looking at it going, you know. I mean, you wouldn't want to get eaten to death.
No, I love it. I love that they've made them look a bit more animalistic. And actually, you know, you're right. Like, it's not like a giant budget movie, and you can see the CGI-ness of it a little bit, but I think it's really brave because notoriously, right, apparently fur is very hard to do with CGI. Like, that's why a lot of the time when you see CGI aliens, they look shiny and they look more, computerized. And the fact that Joe Cornish actually designed these as these kind of furry, sort of dog-like creatures is pretty ambitious for like a first-time filmmaker with a low budget and that kind of thing, But I think they look amazing. I love the glowing teeth and eyes, so good. So good.
Yeah, totally agree. But for me, and actually the way they look, the thing is, for anyone who's ever seen Critters, immediately that's what you'll think. I
it's
know,
true.
And it is. And the thing is, I've not seen the sequels of Critters, but I've seen the original Critters, and it's ridiculous. But I love it. I love it. It's ridiculous. I love it. It's a great fun 80s film, and I'm sure Joe Cornish was thinking when he was designing, oh, maybe we do that, but a little bit scarier, or that, but a little bit naughtier.
That's right. And speaking of, let me ask you the very basic question. Do you find this film scary? Is this a scary horror film?
I didn't on repeat viewings, but I have a feeling because there are a couple of jump scares.
Yeah.
Jump squares?
Wow,
jump squares. That sounds like some appalling chat show or game show you might watch with me hosting,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? No, jump scares. There are some jump scares in it, and actually when I watched it in the cinema, I definitely did have a couple of, like that moment. But it's not inherently the scariest film.
It's more like a sort of... you said The Warriors. Like, it almost feels more like a sort of action film. Like, you get more satisfaction from watching them all load up with weapons and go out on their little scooters and kill them, right? It's one of those types of films. But there is a moment that creeped me out where they look out the window and they see that two of them are just sort of staring in the window at them. That's a great moment, isn't it, as well? And I think it dabbles in horror, but ultimately it's more kind of action and all that other kind of sci-fi craziness, I think. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the most interesting stuff is where the genres kind of combine.
Yes.
And where you meet at the junction, it's like, well, we're not just going to make a flat-out horror film. We're not just going to make a flat-out sci-fi film. We're not just going to make a flat-out comedy. Or we're going to throw a load of stuff together and actually make it a bit more so that different audiences can get different things out of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. What I like about this is that, again, a little bit like, Shaun of the Dead, it embraces the different genres and the different ideas, but brings it together in a way that is totally its own thing and totally believable. Because, like you say, it's not necessarily the most horrific horror film, but, God, it's entertaining. And, you're laughing with the characters and you're, like, empathising with the characters.
That's it. You're invested, aren't you? Yeah.
And also, any film that includes KRS-One's Sound of the Police has got to be a big film, right?
It's so good, isn't it? And speaking of, let me finish by asking you about the ending. We'll go full spoilers with this, but I want to ask you about the ending, because I think there's something quite important, again, maybe in a 2021 context, the fact that this film ends with this gang, and specifically John Boyega's character, saving the block, potentially saving the world, right? But they all end up getting arrested and put in the back of, like, police vans at the end of the film, don't they? And that is sort of it's a sort of bittersweet ending in that regard, isn't it? I remember going to see Get Out, and we all know the story about Get Out, about how there's that moment at the end of Get Out when Daniel Kaluuya's character sees the blue flashing lights, and you're like, oh shit, he's going to get arrested after all this, and then actually it turns out it's his mate, and it's all like a really kind of fun, uplifting ending. But Attack the Block kind of goes in a slightly different direction with that, where actually they do all end up getting arrested, don't they? What do you think generally of just the way this film ends?
Two things. Three. I don't know, a million things. But like, me, Mike, I'm not exactly short for words, am I? I see it as partly a kind of Monty Python-ish, everyone gets nicked at the end kind of vibe. And that is a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
What a film.
Yeah, that's another story. But that's like a great way to end a film, everyone getting nicked. Yeah. And that, but that's the point of it. It is actually kind of funny in its like, you've watched all these crazy aliens and that. All these, and actually there's a good bit in the corridor in the film. And Nick Frost is walking out. And they're like, oh my God, is it alien? And they're like, no, it's not aliens, it's even worse. And then it's armed police walking down. And that sums it up. It's almost, and even actually, that kind of ending, in a sense, goes right the way back, at least to Night of the Living Dead.
It does.
Because Night of the Living Dead And really, if you've not seen Night of the Living Dead, you shouldn't even be listening. You don't even deserve
everyone listening to this will have
don't
seen
even
Night of the
deserve
Living
to be
Dead.
breathing, let alone listening to this podcast, right? But Night of the Living Dead, obviously the great ending where it looks like another load of zombies marching towards it, and instead, like, the black geezer gets killed. He's the hero, and he gets killed, by these people who are coming to protect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that sort of echoes through horror through the years. It's like they're coming to do the right thing. They think they're doing the right thing, these people, these thugs with guns, and they're the authorities. Well, yeah, there's definitely an element, and maybe Joe Cornish was even thinking of that, because there's definitely an element of this. It's like, these boys, and they've saved, like you say, they've saved the block, their neighbourhood, and potentially the world. And what is their reward for that? Get slung in a meat wagon and then a night in the cells. That's their reward for saving the world. And you know what? That's what a young South London kid, especially a young man of colour, that is the kind of reward that they probably would get.
And it comes down to a white woman at the end saying, by the way, it wasn't them that did that. They were the one that protected me. And so you think maybe there's hope for them because a white woman is standing up for them, right? And again, I think all of that is really smart, I think, that Joe Cornish kind of put in there, whether intentional or not. And I feel like watching it, particularly now, you kind of very much feels like that's in the forefront of your mind, isn't it, I think,
There can't be anyone now. Certainly last year in particular, like, we all saw what happened in America, and we all saw protests, and we've all seen the way that people get treated. And it's like, now the eyes, like, when anything happens, whether it's a racial thing or a street thing or whatever, street disturbances, young kids in gangs, all these sorts of things are now on the forefronts of everybody's minds. If you've got a smartphone and you literally have used social media, all these things are inescapable now. So everything you see now, or even if it's in this case, a film that we're revisiting from 10 years ago, you see it through different eyes now.
Yeah.
And when you see these things, like, you talk about Get Out and all these films the last few years, you definitely see, and you look at things thinking, well, the I don't know, the state apparatus, for want of a better expression, the state apparatus has always been there, but should the police be literally stopping and searching, like in London? Should the police be stopping and searching should they be stopping and searching young black youth 20 times more than white black youth, or 10 times, or even 10 times more? The stats vary on place to place, but it's like, well, no, they shouldn't. They definitely shouldn't. So there are all these things that tie in, and you can only, and then when you see Attack the Block again, and it ends with all these kids getting banged up, really, you think, yeah, times have changed. It'd be interesting to see this film was made 10 years ago. The rumour, more than a rumour, apparently there's a script in motion, and John Boyega wants to do the sequel, belated sequel, and Joe Cornish wants to do the belated sequel. And you tend to think that if Boyega wants to do it, some studio, Universal, whoever, someone will find 5 million, 10 million, because it won't be an expensive film. Now, it'd be interesting to see if they do, because obviously it's been written, but if it does end up getting shot and it does end up getting made, how will Attack the Block, this film that was perhaps deliberately and perhaps accidentally kind of interesting about London and about gang life and about all these things have really come to the fore in the last few years.
They really have.
What do they do with the sequel?
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting, isn't it? And I guess that's a good final question for you, Lou, is that, this film is 10 years... I can't actually believe it's 10 years old already. It still feels to me, in my mind, very recent, but how do you think this film holds up? Do you think it's dated in any way? Do you think... Is this a movie that you would still recommend to people now?
I would definitely recommend it, because it's entertaining, and that doesn't go out of style.
Yeah.
And it's funny, and neither does that. And it's got great performances, and also, like, if anything, really now, if anything, you look at it, it was probably undervalued when it was released.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And now, I'm sure if you put it on a load of streaming services, and said, John Boyega, I guarantee you, especially in the States or among the Star Wars community and that, because that's a massive community of fans, as we know, people would go mad for it. And I'll guarantee you, people would be like, wow, I didn't even know this. I didn't even know about this film.
Yeah.
And you know what? When the inevitable sequel, if it does happen, people will rediscover the first one and go, oh, wow, yeah, we slept on this when it came out, and we shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's a great film, isn't it? Lou, thank you so much. What a joy it's been to discuss this movie together. And just remind us before we go where people can find you, where they can find more of your work out there online.
Well, you can usually find me, as you know, lingering in the gutter, but not looking at the stars, more like looking at my own vomit. Oscar Wilde, he had nothing on me, right? But no, the truth of the matter is, if you want to find me in a professional sense, I work at the BFI, digital production editor on bfi.org.uk, freelance for, Sight and Sound, Empire, Little White Lies. Just a quick plug for my own work, and I know I'm awful. Sorry, guys.
No, do it.
So I wrote, I want to say 5 years ago. I don't know how many years ago. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But years ago, the BFI were doing a London season. It was films about London, blah, blah, blah. And we did articles on 10 great films from North, South, East, West, Central London. We did
cool.
That. Yeah. So I did, unsurprisingly, 10 great films from South London. And yes, Attack the Block is mentioned. So if you're interested in more South London films, I'm obviously not going to read out the link like some sort of imbecile from 1993. What I will say is, Google, you've heard of Google. Google South London, BFI, Lou Thomas. Or even BFI South London films, and I guarantee you the top result will be the piece I wrote whenever it was, and it's a little intro about South London, blah blah blah, and South London filmmaking, and in that piece I talk about Attack the Block, 9 others, but I do an intro about other films that are, if you're interested, if you live in South London or interested in just going there, it's worth a read, I'd say, because I wrote it.
Love it, Lou. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my two brilliant guests, Rhianna Dhillon and Lou Thomas. He's a one of a kind, isn't he? So please do get in touch. What do you guys think of this week's films? What did you think of this week's episode? Please do get in touch. Email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, then join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. You can find this podcast on all the usual podcast platforms, and if you get a spare minute, we would be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, preferably a nice 5-star one, which would really help us get discovered by new listeners. So onwards to next week then, and we're moving back from film into television. Next week, I'm going to be joined by Tim Coleman, and we are going to be discussing one of the most successful alien, cosmic, Lovecraftian, sci-fi, horror, nostalgic television shows from the last 10 years, the Duffer Brothers TV show, Stranger Things. There's going to be lots to discuss. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.